Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with us today on this hot summer day. So my name is Kristen Lillyman, and I'm an engagement specialist with Dillon Consulting. I will be your third-party facilitator for this evening. So we have been working with the city to coordinate and facilitate the engagement for the Municipal Comprehensive Review, or as you may know it, our Plan Toronto. Many of you may have attended and participated in meetings with the city on the official plan in the past. So we had some meetings in the fall, and then we've had recent meetings on environment and climate change policies in April, and then the draft policies, vision and directions in May and earlier in June. This meeting tonight is a policy themed meeting to dig a bit deeper on a specific topic. And the topic tonight is on employment lands and the future of work. And we have two more this week. So tomorrow night we have neighborhoods and complete communities. And the following night after that, on Thursday evening, we have housing and intensification. So go to the next slide. And so we'll start tonight's meeting off, as we do many of our meetings, with the land acknowledgement. The City of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The city also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Acknowledging the land that we are on is only a small piece of recognizing the contributions and the history of Indigenous peoples, as well as our ongoing learning and our progress towards reconciliation. It is also important to recognize that the Indigenous connection to the land that we now call Toronto, as well as Lake Ontario, dates back at least 10,000 years. I also wanted to recognize that today is a special day. It's June 21st, which is National Indigenous Peoples Day. And for generations, many Indigenous peoples and communities have celebrated their culture and heritage on or near this day due to the significance of the summer solstice and being the longest day of the year. So today is a day to recognize and to learn about and celebrate the unique heritage, cultures, and contributions of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I'd also like to make a note that our Plan Toronto is and has been, it's a key part of it has been the integration of and amplification of Indigenous voices, perspectives, history, and understandings as part of this project. Go to the next slide. So the agenda for this evening, we'll start with a little background and refresher on the official plan. And then this meeting, as I mentioned, is a focus on Toronto's economy, as well as employment policies and employment, and that includes employment land conversion requests. There will be time, as you can see from the agenda, there'll be time for questions and discussion between each section. And then at the end, we'll just share some next steps and wrap up the meeting by 7 p.m. at the latest tonight. Next slide. So a few introductions of who's on the call this evening. So we're joined today by those who are at the city leading the official plan review, and that includes Jeff Cantos, who I will ask now to introduce the city team.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Cantos, and I'm the manager of the city's official plan team, and I'm joined tonight with a number of city staff and consultants. So I'm joined by with Christina Haydorn, our project manager in the OP team, official plan team, Kyle Farron, Pauline Beaupre, and Jason Sang, also on the official plan team, Philip Parker, who is working on the major transit station areas, and also from city planning, David Fitzpatrick, and from economic development and culture, Rebecca Condon, and Adam Mattinson from Hemson Consulting. And so members of my team are here to help answer and facilitate discussion. So if you'd like to put any questions in the chat, they will be on it. Thanks for joining. Over to you, Kristen.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. So from Dillon Consulting, I also have joining me tonight, Yingyi and Anish Chowdhury, who are helping kind of manage the meeting behind the scenes, including taking the meeting minutes for this evening. I would also like to welcome participants who are with us tonight to introduce yourselves. We'd love to know who's joining us for this meeting. So next slide. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. Please remain muted while you're not talking. If you have a question or comment, again, you can use that chat or raise hand function. And Jeff, as he mentioned, the team will be in there and able to respond to your questions, although try to respond to your questions live. There will be dedicated discussion points throughout the presentation to address questions. I'd ask that you please introduce yourself so we know who's asking the question before you ask it. This meeting is being recorded today, as you may have seen. We will only post the presentation component online on the OurPlan website. The comments and discussion that take place here this evening will be used for note-taking purposes only. So just a little note on my role as meeting facilitator. So my job is to manage the discussion and make sure that everyone gets a chance to be heard. To ensure that everyone's able to participate, we ask that you think about and raise that one question that you really want to be answered the most. We strongly do suggest one question per person, especially if you're asking it live, and you will be held accountable to that. If you don't get your question answered live, there will be a Q&A as part of the meeting minutes that is posted on the OurPlan website. Next slide. So just some participant guidelines for tonight's meeting. We do welcome your questions and discussion. Again, there are those key points for discussion throughout the meeting. And we do really believe that there are no bad questions, no wrong questions. If you're thinking it, chances are someone else is asking it as well, or is thinking it as well. We do want to hear from everyone. We do believe that everyone has wisdom and experience to share with the group and the team here. But on that note, of course, there's going to be differences in opinion. That happens a lot whenever you get a large group together, but try to be respectful and listen because everyone deserves to be heard. On that note, the city is here to listen to your feedback, your thoughts, and your perspectives. So please don't be shy and let us know what you think about what you're seeing today. Next slide. So just a note on the chat function. Again, it will be active throughout the meeting. We want to keep it open. It will be available and you can share ideas, get to know each other. You can ask your questions. The city team and the Dillon team and Adam from Hempson will be monitoring it. And if there are questions, they will try to respond. A reminder to be respectful. We do want to keep it active. But if there are disrespectful or abusive comments, we will have to close the chat. Next slide. So why are we all here tonight on this beautiful evening? Although that's debatable, I guess, depending on your tolerance for the heat. But we are here tonight because the city is going to provide an overview of the official plan and also those draft employment policies. And we do want to hear feedback. So we're going to open it up to questions and dialogue. And then we'll share next steps with you and talk about how you can continue to be engaged in this work. Next slide. So this is a snapshot of the project process. The project initially launched in May 2021, and we've gone through parts 1, which was the vision and priorities, and part 2, asking big questions and setting policy directions. And during that time, the city and our Dillon engagement team were doing a lot of listening through public meetings, youth engagement, online engagement and surveys, meetings with Indigenous rights holders and organizations, and through a community leader circle. Now we're at the point here in part 3 where the city has created draft policies. And we have been continuing to meet with people and organizations to discuss our Plan Toronto. And so far in phase 3, we have held meetings on draft environment and climate change policies, a series of meetings on the draft vision and directions for the official plan. And then we have these 3 policy-focused meetings. And all of this is kind of leading to a report to Planning and Housing Committee on July 5th. But there will be additional engagement through after July, including more engagement on the draft vision and directions of the official plan. Next slide. So this is just an overview of the engagement on this project to date. So in part 1, part 2, and part 3, or so far in part 3, we have held over 75 meetings and met with over 2,300 people, including various internal and external stakeholders, organizations, companies, and residents. So this work has included a focus on reaching underrepresented populations and the groups that work with them, including Indigenous rights holders and organizations, youth, and that was through schools and school boards, seniors through the Seniors Roundtable, and we've also held a few focused conversations, and that has been, there's been one around accessibility, and there was another around a specific geography of Scarborough. So we've also had an online component to the engagement, and the Our Plan website and our story maps, which is kind of like an online resource to explore data and information and maps related to the project. They have received over 10,000 visits. Next slide. So our team has organized all of the input we have received to date into some key themes. The cross-cutting themes that you see on the left of your screen there, those are themes that came forward in every meeting across different organizations and groups in different communities with Indigenous organizations. And what emerged were a few themes, but one theme was on equity, inclusion, and relationship building. So that included addressing inequities across the city, be more inclusive, reflect diversity of the city, require universal and accessible design. Then we had another theme around community-led solutions. And that was a call to work collaboratively with communities, especially when it came to big change in neighborhoods and big development. Learning from the past and implementation. So I was understanding the history of communities and the history of issues in those communities. Aligning priorities and conversations. So trying to get everyone on the same page, and that also included leadership alignment. So the other themes that you see on the right side of your screen, in the darker green, they were themes that were raised the most frequent. So the most frequently discussed issues and items. So that included housing affordability and the scale of intensification, environment and climate change, jobs, and so that topic was particularly heightened because of COVID. But there was also other things that emerged, like a call for more jobs for the youth and entry-level positions across a range of sectors, and also access to jobs, so access within or close to their own neighborhoods. Safety for all, complete communities where every neighborhood needs a complete communities approach. And universal design, so people don't age out. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. So we're going to have an engagement moment now where we're going to do some live polling. So I will ask you to get either your smartphone available or pull up your desktop browser that you can access menti.com. So we'll go to the next slide so you can see the instructions. And I'll ask Ish to put the link in the chat in case you want to access it from your web browser. So go to menti.com, and then there's the code there on the screen, 8608-5607. And you can also scan the QR code on the screen with your smartphone camera app, and then click the link once you're prompted. So if anyone has any issues, you can let us know in the chat and we can send you the link again or let you know the code. But we have a couple questions for you to get us started, and we'll go to the live results now. So these are mainly questions just to get to know who is here with us this evening at the meeting, and where you're tuning in from. So here we have some results coming in already. And if you haven't had a chance to get there yet, on the top of the screen there, you can see the web address and the code. So if you can still have a chance to get in and log your results of the poll. So far we have people from across the city and a couple outside of Toronto, but the bulk in Toronto East York. We'll give another minute here while people continue to register on menti.com. Okay, maybe we'll go to the next question. So this is, we're wondering if you have participated in other our planned Toronto engagement activities in the past. So I mentioned there were some meetings in the fall, there was meetings early in 2022, and just in the spring now we had a series of meetings. So many of you, it seems, have participated in meetings in the past, or at least another engagement activity. And many of you are here for the first time, so welcome. Thanks for joining us. Okay, we'll go to the next question. So this is, if you said, yes, you've participated in the past, we want to know how you've participated. So did you attend a different virtual citywide meeting, another type of virtual meeting, so like a stakeholder meeting? Did you complete an online survey? Are you a member of the Community Leaders Circle? Have you checked out our website or participated in a social media dialogue? Or visited our story maps, which we've had a couple of those that are still on the website. So many of you have attended virtual meetings in the past, and some of you have also participated online. And 3 members of the Community Leader Circle. Great. Okay, so we'll go to the next question. This is just for us to understand your familiarity with the document of the Toronto Official Plan. So how familiar are you? From not at all to extremely. You can, check which one you feel applies the most to your level of familiarity with this document. Okay, so many of you are moderately familiar, and some of you not so much, and some of you quite a bit. This is good for those of you who are less familiar with the official plan. We will have a section of the presentation on the official plan, just kind of a refresher and some background information. So then you'll know a little bit more. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So we'll go to the next question. And this is for those of you who are currently do use the official plan. How do you use it? So there's options here as a resident, as a member of a group or organization, for work, which I see a number of people have already said they do for work already, as a student for education purposes, other, and not sure. So we have a lot here who use the official plan for work, and then some as a resident, as a group, as a member of a group or organization, and some as a student as well. Okay, so that's our last question for this segment, but I'd ask that you leave your smartphone app or the browser open, because we will have one more question before we end the meeting this evening. So leave it open, but for now, I will hand it over to Jeff to provide an overview and that background on the official plan.
Thanks, Kristen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining us again. I'm going to take you through a really quick official plan refresher for those of you who were somewhat in tune with the official plan. Next slide, please. So what this slide shows is there's us at the bottom right, the city of Toronto, with a population nearing 2.8 million. And the city of Toronto is nestled in what's called the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, the map in the middle, with our neighboring municipalities, with a population of just over 10.2 million in 2021, which is again nestled into the province of Ontario, again with a population of just about 15 million. Next slide, please. And so what this slide shows is the nestling of the planning system within which we work. So at the very top are the matters of provincial interest. So that includes the Planning Act, which is the law or legislation, the provincial policy statement that the province sets out for all land use decisions within the province. And then the next layer is the regional growth plans. So the province puts out the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe area. And some of you may have heard about the Greenbelt Plan. Again, another plan that sets out regional growth parameters or no growth for areas that transcend municipal boundaries. And then in the middle, at the green, is the citywide vision. And here is what we're talking about, the Toronto Official Plan. And within the official plan is nestled area priorities, what we call secondary plans, that are usually outcomes of local area studies, and sometimes they're also called precinct plans. And how those get implemented in the yellow are the area-specific implementation. So sometimes an area may have a zoning bylaw of its own. And then it goes down to right down to the building, which is a site-specific precision. Again, so those are the bylaw standards. So potentially how many parking spaces per building or a setback. Okay, next slide, please. So the official plan, that green layer in the middle, is a city planning document that acts as Toronto's roadmap for future land use matters. It sets out our long-term and future vision, our shared values, and policies that help guide decision-making on land development, economic growth, and the environment, and more. And so the province of Ontario requires municipalities within the Greater Golden Horseshoe area to review our plan to make sure that it conforms with the regional plan, the growth plan that the province sets out. So that's this exercise that we're undertaking. And in the growth plan, the province sets out population and growth forecasts that we, the city, and our neighboring municipalities are undertaking similar exercises, that we have to demonstrate that we've got a plan in place that conforms to those growth forecasts. And the forecasts for Toronto are a minimum of 700,000 people and a minimum of 450,000 jobs for 2051. Next slide, please. So this slide, going back to the official plan. So the official plan, there's our cover page. And we have policies in 5 chapters. The 4th chapter called land use designations. And that's the map at the bottom right. So there's a citywide. And then on the next slide, please, you'll see the land use designation map in chapter 4, where we have associated land use designations and their policies. Next slide, please. And it shows on the left that the city, the official plan that we're reviewing can be broken down into 75-25, 75% of the city that's not expected to accommodate much of the growth, and 25% that will accommodate most of the growth, again, for 30 years to 2030. Again, that's the official plan that we're reviewing. And if you were to take the city of Toronto and turn it into a hypothetical 100 blocks, you'll see on the right, there's about 19% of the city that are roads existing, and they don't carry a designation. About 35% of the city are neighborhoods, the yellow. And then on the bottom, about 5% are mixed use areas, and 13% are what are called core employment areas and general employment areas. And that'll be a big focus of parts of this evening's presentation. Next slide, please. So again, the province identifies what are called provincially significant employment zones. And we, at the official plan, we designate our employment areas, again, that 13%. So the map on the left is a map from the province that shows the portions of the Greater Golden Horseshoe area and the provincially significant employment zones within the region. And then again, we're nestled into that region, and we at the city designate our core employment areas and general employment areas that amount to approximately 8,100 hectares of the city. Again, that's 13% of the city's land base, and this land base accommodates 25% of all the jobs across the city. So that's over 400,000 jobs. And 92% of all the manufacturing, industrial, and warehousing jobs within the city are found within this 13% of core employment areas and general employment areas. Next slide, please. So as a statement, our employment areas, the 13% of the city, serves the public interest. These lands, the 13%, and the jobs that they accommodate provide low barrier entry jobs for newcomers to Canada, those who face challenges with their professional certifications being recognized here upon arrival, where individuals whose first language is not English. These lands accommodate living wage employment opportunities in the local community with good transit access. What we found over the pandemic was some of our surface bus routes in our suburbs were some of the most well used, connecting people from where they lived to where they worked. And we called them at the time, and we still do, the essential goods and services that didn't, like myself, didn't have the privilege to be working from home. These lands also, the 13%, give or create land use certainty for operating businesses that do provide those essential goods and services as well. Next slide, please. This slide, if you zoom in your screen, is just another way of connecting our employment areas closer to home. So for example, on the top left, you see someone's house and the different components in your house. For example, where your sewage goes, it goes to a wastewater treatment plant that can be found in employment areas. The concrete that we walk upon has to be batched close by because it's one of those items and goods that have a just-in-time requirement. So those two are batched in employment areas. We don't want them batched nearby where people live. Our online purchases, they have to be stored and distributed somewhere. More often than not, they are in our employment areas. And then when you open your fridge, many of the essential goods in our fridge can be found through their origin story to our employment areas, from food processing, industrial bakeries, to even sugar refinery.
And I'll hand it at this time over to Adam from Hempson Consulting to speak about an employment study that was undertaken.
Thank you, Kristen.
You're welcome.
As mentioned, Hempson was retained by the city to assist with their review of employment trends and their relation to land uses in order to inform their policy work that's ongoing as part of the Municipal Comprehensive Review. Through this review and work, we conducted a thorough analysis of job growth and economic change across different parts of the city in order to understand where and how people and businesses participate in the local and regional economy, and how this relates to the city's land use policies. This included a comprehensive analysis of different types of employment land, development trends, and how we use and access space, not only today, but how we anticipate it might be used in the future, particularly in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. The following slides provide a high-level overview of our findings from the study. Next slide, please. Our review of Toronto's employment profile shows the changing role that Toronto has played as the central city in the broader economic region over the past 3 decades. Following the recessions of the 80s and 90s, the story of employment in Toronto was one of transition, as certain industries declined and others experienced varying levels of growth. This all changed following the global Great Recession of 2008-2009, when the city experienced a period of sustained and steady growth. Data from the Toronto Employment Survey for the time between the tail end of the recession in 2011 and just prior to the start of the pandemic in 2019 shows overall jobs in the city increased by 19.2% to a total of just over 1.57 million jobs. Now, I will note here, we conduct a fair amount of our analysis based on the 2019 data, as the impacts of the pandemic resulted in data issues with the Toronto Employment Survey in 2020 and 2021, primarily on account of the number of people that were transitioning to and from work from home during the lockdowns, which affected how people reported their employment. For this reason, we use the 2019 numbers as a more apples-to-apples comparison with previous years, while also looking at the impacts of the pandemic a bit further on. Digging into these 2019 numbers, we see the diversity of Toronto's employment profile in terms of the types of jobs and businesses spread across the city. Looking at jobs spread across land use activity codes, which reflect the type of land and space used to accommodate these jobs, we see the dominance of the office sector, which is not surprising given Toronto's prominence as a central employment node in the Greater Toronto Area, and its rising importance as a global hub for commerce and innovation. Beyond this, however, we also see a relatively even distribution of jobs in non-office type employment, from service and retail to institutional jobs like hospitals and education, to manufacturing and warehousing of goods. When looking at these figures, it is important to recognize the interconnected nature of each of these job types and how they support each other, while offering a range of employment opportunities for residents and newcomers across the city. Next slide, please. It is also important to recognize the relationship between different types of jobs and the land use policies that enable them. Here we see a map of Toronto's employment in 2019 spread out across the city. We can see a strong correlation between land use policies intended to direct employment uses to key nodes and areas, specifically the downtown and central waterfront shown in orange, and other designated centers shown in red, as well as the city's various employment areas, which are shown in blue. There is also a smattering of other employment we can see found primarily along the avenues and corridors of the city. We can also see the density of employment varies across the city, with the highest concentrations found in Toronto's downtown core, along with other office-oriented centers and employment areas, particularly those well served by transit. However, we also see other pockets of employment spread across the city, reflecting different types of economic activity that reflect specific land and location needs. Next slide, please. We see these needs more clearly when we look at the type of employment by land use category. For example, while office employment is a major portion of all jobs found in the downtown and centers, it is also found in the employment areas and other parts of the city. Conversely, we see jobs related to manufacturing and warehousing almost exclusively located in the city's employment areas, effectively about 92% of these jobs, as Jeff mentioned previously, reflecting the unique land needs that these types of activities have. I would note here that there's also much more going on these lands rather than just the number of jobs that are occurring thereon. In many cases, manufacturing and warehousing jobs, for example, are critical for supporting other businesses, providing goods and services such as food production, logistical support, vehicle and equipment repair, and even the batching of concrete and asphalt as building materials needed to build new housing and other types of infrastructure. Each plays an important role in supporting the local economy while also providing a range of accessible employment opportunities across the economic spectrum of skills, education, and professional development. Next slide, please. When discussing employment, we of course cannot ignore the COVID-19 pandemic and the way it has impacted where and how we work. At its worst, employment in Ontario was down 15% from pre-pandemic levels. Now, for context, a typical recession usually results in declines of between 3 and 5%, a mark which Ontario only recovered to at the beginning of 2021. While subsequent waves of the virus did slow the rate of recovery, we have eventually reached pre-pandemic levels of employment as of September, with consistent growth occurring since, even through the most recent wave of the Omicron wave. While we have generally recovered in terms of overall employment, it is also important to recognize the ways in which the pandemic has shifted the ways in which we work and the way we need space and land to do so. For example, we are still figuring out the return to the office after so many people were able to transition to work from home and are now experimenting with hybrid at-home and in-office schedules. At the same time, local logistics and manufacturing space saw new levels of importance, with the increased shift towards e-commerce and also the rehoming of many manufacturing activities. Through all of this, we also need to remain cognizant of the impacts of recent rises in interest rates, ongoing supply chain issues, global conflicts, and worries over a coming recession, and how they too may impact our economic outlook further down the road. Next slide, please. Looking at specific employment uses and the recent changes we've experienced, some of the most significant COVID-related shifts occurred in Toronto's office market. As the central city in the GTA, Toronto plays a major role in the region, with the downtown and midtown areas of Toronto accounting for over half of all regional office space inventory. Prior to the pandemic, office space in Toronto was in extreme demand and short supply, with vacancies as low as 3%. Since the start of the pandemic, this vacancy rate has raised to roughly 9%, the highest it has been since 2005, but still within what many economists would consider a reasonably healthy range to allow economic flexibility. This comes partly as the result of office employers rethinking their space needs as they experiment with hybrid in-office and work-from-home arrangements, but also as the result of over 9 million square feet of new space being built since 2011, with more on the way. While office users are still navigating the new normal, this may create new opportunities for smaller players to find space in the market that was previously incredibly tight and competitive. However, despite recent rises in vacancies, rental rates in the central market have yet to fall by a significant degree, something that may change over time. We will need to continue to watch the office market in the coming months as we emerge from the shadow of the pandemic to further understand what this means for land use policies and how to evaluate them. Next slide, please. On the other side of the coin, Toronto's employment lands and industrial areas have continued to experience incredible growth and demand, both before and now through the pandemic. Toronto currently accounts for 28% of the GTA's overall industrial space inventory, where vacancy rates have been incredibly low over the past 5 years, reaching recent record lows as low as 1.3%. While the supply of land and space for this type of use has always been limited in the city, demand has only grown, particularly with the increased prevalence of e-commerce through the pandemic, as we see suppliers like Amazon, Purolator, and others seeking new space to get people the goods they are purchasing online. Competition for space has started to put a real squeeze on industrial users, with average asking rents having doubled since 2015. With land and rent values increasing, we are seeing businesses and developers investing in new ways in Toronto's employment lands, with significant amounts of new space being developed or renovated to accommodate new and growing businesses. We are also seeing new forms of development, including buildings with over 40-foot clear ceilings and even multi-level industrial logistical buildings, types of development that previously had not been seen in Ontario or even in most parts of North America previously. Next slide, please. Alongside this activity has been a steady amount of job growth. Where prior to the 2008 and 2009 recession, Toronto's employment areas had experienced a gradual level of employment decline, with new development occurring elsewhere in the fringes of the GTA, recent growth has come back to the central city strong. Almost every cluster of employment areas within the city experienced considerable growth in the time between 2011 and 2019, growing by 15% to 419,000 total jobs. Importantly, many of these jobs are amongst sectors that cannot easily locate elsewhere in the city, including 25% of all jobs being in goods producing industry and 19% being direct manufacturing jobs, reflected the intended policy for these areas. Beyond this, these spaces also provide accessible employment for many of Toronto's residents of varying ranges of skill, education, qualification, and professional experience. Not everyone can or even wants to work in an office job, and these areas are often critical for supporting different folks across the economic spectrum. There's also a strong linkage between these areas and local residents, particularly those that live in Toronto's neighborhood improvement areas, many of which take public transit or active forms of transit to their place of work located in these employment areas. And so building out those kinds of connections will also be a key point moving forward for the city's planning. Next slide, please. To summarize a few very high-level key findings from our study, in taking an equity lens, employment areas are very important to achieving the city's equity goals, particularly given their strategic location across the city. And as I mentioned, some near to these neighborhood improvement areas, and many of which are accessible via transit. Another point is to keep an eye on the office market. It is frankly too early to determine what permanent effects may manifest from the office market, as working practices are still in a state of flux. So we recommend that the city continue to monitor return to work trends and track key office indicators, including space uptake, vacancy, and market rents. On the industrial side, we do note that the industrial market is incredibly active and under incredible pressure. We're seeing an incredible amount of activity in terms of building permits, in terms of new space construction since the year 2000, as well as additions and renovations and structural other permits, demonstrating a healthy level of reinvestment in these areas alongside the employment growth that we also saw in the previous data. There's a high level of demand and limited supply that is leading to record high rents that are putting pressure on existing users while other users are competing for space. At the same time, this is creating opportunities for the redevelopment of existing land and buildings and creating new opportunities for new types of uses that we need to be cognizant of in our land use policies. With that said, on the next slide, we have summarized a number of key findings and recommendations for the city to consider. Next slide, please. Summarized here on this slide, just at a very high level, are some of the key policy directions, including continuing to protect employment areas over the long term for their continued important role in the economy. This includes protecting for the strategic use of employment areas to promote economic development and competitiveness of the city within the region and as part of the region as a whole. We are encouraging the city to preserve lands near major goods movement facilities and corridors, particularly recognizing the role of e-commerce and logistics in the city, and its particularly last mile delivery is becoming more and more important, while also recognizing the need to prohibit residential uses in employment areas in line with the direction for provincial policy. In order to limit conflict between sensitive uses that are not ancillary to the employment uses, we're also recommending the city consider reviewing its policies to limit those types of conflicts and between those sensitive uses. And also, we recommend that the city continue to maintain their conversion request criteria, which were previously approved by the Ontario Municipal Board, which is a considerable tool for evaluating how the city should address conversion requests moving forward, while also advocating for additional provincially significant employment zones, like what was done with the food terminal, as mentioned previously, to ensure additional degrees of certainty as it relates to Toronto's employment areas. We also recommend the establishment of minimum employment densities for employment areas to encourage the effective use of the remaining employment lands we have, while also supporting office-focused employment areas beyond the centers, corridors, and downtown, recognizing that there are also key office employment nodes across the city. Our full report can be accessed at the link below on the city's website. And at this point, I will hand it back to Kristen and would be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Next slide, please. So today, as we've been spending a lot of time talking about employment areas, and that's what this part of the presentation is about, is those areas that are identified in our official plan as locations exclusively for business and for economic activities. And in our official plan, these are purple areas. These are intended to be protected because they're large, extensive areas that have good access, either by major highways or roads, or they're along rail corridors, transportation facilities that aid in the movement of goods and also provide good visibility. In our policies and in the provincial policies, there is a deliberate attempt to protect these uses, or these lands for these specific uses, recognizing all of the competing interests for land throughout, especially through the Greater Golden Horseshoe area. Residential uses are explicitly not permitted in employment areas, and that's become stronger in recent years with new provincial policies that we'll talk about in a moment. But it's also recognized in policy, and I really appreciated the question early on in the meeting today, how do we plan for change? I mean, we all acknowledge that we need to create an opportunity to review our policies, and so that is done in provincial policy and within our official plan, where we have set out a process by which we will consider, during the review of our official plan and during the municipal comprehensive review process, we will consider how these areas are performing and what the requirement is to maintain them for the lifetime of the plan. Because the economy changes, the local context changes, the interests of people change, and so we need to reevaluate continuously how these lands are functioning, and just ensuring that they're in a location that is functional and that they're continuing to contribute to the economic health of the city. So recognizing that conversions are permitted and that we review them at only certain times in the planning process, which is every 5 years, we established during this MCR a pretty prescriptive process by which one could request to convert their lands. And convert means to change it to another land use designation, for example, mixed use areas, which in turn would permit a very broad range of uses, including residential. But we also received conversion requests that were landowners looking for some broader permissions, but not necessarily residential or sensitive land uses. So we received 140 of these requests, either by an official plan amendment or by a conversion request. And that conversion request consisted of a justification report prepared by a planner, as well as the compatibility mitigation study that I spoke about previously that looks explicitly at the sorts of uses that exist or can exist in employment areas around it. And then those were peer reviewed. And in some cases, we did require a fee from the conversion requester, depending on when we received their conversion request. We also considered some employment lands for redesignation as part of a larger planning process. So there were a number of studies that have been undertaken across the city that led us to think that it would be a good time to just look at how those employment areas are functioning and whether or not there needed to be any changes or a conversion. So that included Downsview area, which is presently going through an updated or a revision process, Geary Avenue and the Geary Works planning study, Mount Dennis planning study, and Kiel St. Clair. So those all formed part of the conversion request. In total, about 8.5% of our employment areas were being requested for conversion. And we, upon receiving the requests, basically immediately, most of them we received last summer, we began a due diligence process, which involved, actually, can we go to the next slide, please? It involved reviewing all of the materials, and the materials, whether they were submitted as part of a justification or as part of a justification study in support of a conversion request, or if they were part of a formal official plan amendment, they had to do the same things. They had to respond to provincial policy and city policy that included tests. So is there a need to convert? If the conversion occurs, will it impact or could it impact surrounding the viability of surrounding employment areas, or are there mitigation measures that should be introduced to limit the potential impact? We reviewed all of the materials. Staff have gone out and visited all of the sites. We conducted peer reviews of all the compatibility mitigation studies, and also undertook the required land needs assessment, and the methodology for that is laid out by the province. And that is a particular study that enables us to determine whether or not we can achieve the population and employment forecasts set out to us by the province. And that's what's helping to establish whether a conversion is needed or not needed. As well, we engaged with stakeholders broadly through sector-specific industry meetings, through specific business outreach, and we prepared a series of preliminary assessments. And these assessments went to Planning and Housing Committee between January and April of this year, and it laid out staff's preliminary opinion, what they thought about the material that had been received, so that when we were conducting follow-up meetings, conversion requesters and the public knew what staff's initial thinking was. Now, we are taking a phased approach now for the final step, which is our final assessments. So now that we've had the preliminary assessments, spoken with the landowners, allowed them to respond to initial concerns, we're now ready to bring about 20 conversion requests forward to the July 5th special public meeting. And that's where all of you, all the public is invited to, again, express their views in the public record and listen to Planning and Housing Committee's responses to our recommendations. So we will be recommending just over 20 conversions. The remaining over 100 conversion requests we felt required more time to assess. And so those will be reported on in early 2023, so the first quarter of 2023. Could I go to the next slide? This is because in the case, we've received a lot of conversion requests, and as Jeff was explaining, each request requires a considerable amount of effort and consideration to review by not just city planning, but by our economic development staff and by reaching out to other landowners. So we're going to use the next few months during the council break for the election to assess the remaining conversion requests. But in this case, going towards July, and you'll see maybe we'll post our recommended official plan 591. In it, it describes our recommendations, and effectively it is, if you can see in the table there, that about 2.3 hectares be converted from core employment area to general. So general allows all the uses that are permitted in core employment areas. So those are your traditional manufacturing or logistics or office uses, but also allows for retail. And they're generally located on the periphery of an employment area so that it can serve both the workers of the employment area as well as the general public. And so those conversions are not introducing residential, but maybe broadening the permissions to include retail. The next set of conversions that are listed in the table, in total, it's about 63 hectares, are about either redesignating lands to regeneration areas, institutional areas, mixed use areas, or parks. And all of these land use designations have specific permissions detailed in the official plan. Regeneration areas, and I'll just spend a bit of time speaking about that one because there's 45 hectares we're recommending be converted to regeneration areas. That is a land use designation that doesn't automatically provide additional permissions. What it does is prioritize the area for a study, and what will come out of the study is a determination of what the land should be designated. So maybe some will be retained as employment, some retained as parks, some used for mixed use. Regeneration areas means that additional study will be done. And a SASP, SASP means site and area specific policy. So in the case of regeneration areas, we also have not just all the regeneration area policies that are in our OP, but an additional layer of policy that specifically speaks to the local context and our expectations of the study. And you'll see that even in cases where we are recommending employment areas be redesignated to institutional or to mixed use or to parks, we are also recommending a site and area specific policy. And when looking at the recommended OPA 591, the commonality in those SASPs is a requirement for affordable housing and a requirement for non-residential gross floor area. So both of those requirements are trying to, one, reflect what we think is possible in the local area, but also trying to use the lands in a way that will retain jobs, but also ensure that we are providing opportunities for residential but affordable residential uses. And then in some cases, there are also requirements for technical studies. I won't speak about any specific conversion requests. You're welcome to put something in the chat and we can get back to you about specific locations. Otherwise, Kristen, happy to entertain any of the questions that have come up. Thank you. And next slide, please. I appreciate that conversions are a lot of interest to everyone. And so I'm happy that we're having that discussion and we can continue after this part of the presentation. But there are some recommendations that we are making to our enforce policies, the ones that exist today. As part of our OPA 231, so our MCR that was conducted to implement the policies of the 2006 growth plan, we did make some fundamental changes to the economic health and employment policies. So this time around during the MCR, the citywide policies we think are quite robust and implement the provincial directions. There are a few places where we think that there should be some tweaks so that we can conform to provincial policy or to clarify the intent of some of our policies. And that's what I'll just describe right now. I appreciate that many of you only feel moderately comfortable with the official plan, so I will lay out very specifically the areas that we are considering or recommending for amendments. Next slide, please. I've identified there that there are 7 chapters, and so we're not making or proposing changes to policies in all of the chapters. And in some cases, the amendments or the modifications that are being recommended are not actually the policy, but their text that sits before the policy or beside the policy to help you interpret the policy. So Chapter 2 of the official plan describes that the city will grow. It recognizes that growth is important and then sets up the structure in which that growth will be accommodated. And so the amendments that must be made to this chapter in the official plan are those dealing with explicit growth forecasts that are provided to us by the province. So the provincial policy directions describe that the city must plan to be able to accommodate a forecasted growth of just over 3.5 million people by 2051 and almost 2 million jobs by 2051. And we need to have those numbers reflected in our official plan. And also as part of I was referencing earlier, the land needs assessment. The land needs assessment works to ensure that the land as designated could accommodate that growth. Another requirement that has been introduced as part of the current provincial policy is a need to establish an employment density on our employment lands. So employment lands are one of those land use designations, one of those structuring parts of the city that is intended to accommodate growth. We want it to grow. At the same time, we recognize that jobs, while a helpful indicator of growth, may not tell the whole story, especially in our employment areas. So presently, our employment areas accommodate, I think it's 45 jobs per gross hectare. We are required by the province to establish a density target for our employment areas. And so we are recommending that that density target be 50 jobs across all of the employment areas determined at the time of the next MCR. So we may be reviewing incrementally or annually as we undertake our Toronto employment survey and we do our monitoring programs. We will be monitoring it. But this density target is intended to reflect, I think, the ambition to use land in our employment areas more wisely, but also recognize that these are not all and should not all develop in a dense office form, for example, that there are going to be many instances where we have less intense forms of development, either reflected in GFA or in the number of people working there, especially as technologies improve. So 50 reflects, I think, a balance between striving or having an ambition to increase the number of people working in our employment areas, particularly in those locations that can accommodate it, but also recognizing that there are locations that will continue to have lower job densities, because jobs, again, are not the only way that we measure economic health. And then sidebar, they're describing the city's role in the regional economy and again, our expectations for employment growth. Next slide, please. Really, what I'd like you to see is just the difference there. If we toggle back and forth, the next amendment would be to actually modify the lands that are designated employment areas to recognize those lands that we are recommending for conversion, because they will no longer be purple or identified within the urban structure of the city, but instead take on a new designation. Next slide, please. One of the other one of the things we, Hempson or Adam helped us understand, and what we're seeing through the various surveys that are conducted throughout the city, and literature is telling us this as well, is that there has been a change in the composition of our employment areas, and while manufacturing or traditional manufacturing may be moving out, not just of Toronto or out of the region, we have other types of land extensive businesses that play a very important role in our economy and in our everyday lives. And this is an example here of an Amazon distribution warehouse. Amazon is opening in Scarborough and has purchased a large site for that. What COVID has shown us, and this was already happening before COVID, this interest in e-commerce and all of the supports that go with it, including warehousing, distribution, vehicle parking, and not just for really large facilities, but also for now smaller cities that are smaller sites that are closer to the resident population. So we're recognizing in Chapter 3, where we house our retail policies, that there should be some additional recognition of the need for and the role of land for e-commerce. So this policy that is being proposed recognizes that e-commerce and logistics and warehousing need to be well located, and that means close to residents, but also close to transportation and also close to sources. And then recognizing that new mixed use developments need to have facilities that allow us to have someone drop off something to our home or to our building relatively quickly without interfering with the transportation system or bike system or sidewalks. And that's what those policies do. Next slide, please. Chapter 4, this is the land use designations. And so Chapter 4 is where we explicitly lay out those uses that are permitted on a particular site based on, the land use plan, and there's an example there. Again, purple representing employment lands, dark purple is core, light purple is general. Part of the I guess, argument that we've heard in the past is if employment land is on the edge of an employment area, or is being used for retail versus a traditional employment use, that it is somehow perceived as being less important or more available for conversion or broadening of uses. And from a planning perspective, that's not necessarily the case, or not always the case. Maybe in some locations it could be considered, but generally both employment and core employment area, general employment and core, are equally important to our land inventory, as well as to supporting the economic health of the city. And so we just thought that that required an additional call out. That's at the bottom of the slide there. A new policy that we're adding, it wasn't explicit in previous, in the official plan as it is today. Our official plan is written in so that it's permissive. It describes those uses that are permitted in employment areas, because if we attempt to say all of those uses or list all of those uses that are prohibited, we would likely miss some. So the provincial policies now explicitly prohibit residential in employment areas. And so we will, to conform to provincial policy, will are now proposing that a policy be introduced that prohibits residential in employment areas, both core and general. And then to make the intent clearer, we are also proposing a sidebar text. And this is sometimes definitions that we rely on. And in this case, it's recognizing that residential, in the case of use residential in an employment area that's prohibited, what would be prohibited includes, typical dwelling units that you might be familiar with, the apartments and houses, but also group homes, nursing homes, retirement homes, long-term care homes. And sometimes I recognize that these are uses that have jobs, so they are job generating uses, which is one side of the equation because they do provide a place for people to work. But at the other hand, they are also a place where people live. And as we've been discussing, if you introduce people into an employment area and they live there, there is this greater chance for complaints and instability and in the end, potential impacts to the viability of the employment area. So that's what that new sidebar text speaks to. Next slide, please. The only thing that's different on this slide is that you'll see when looking at the recommended official plan amendment 591 that there are a series of maps. And these maps, thanks, actually, if you just go to the next one, when you have a look at the OP, you will see that we've identified, oh, sorry, no, you can go back, in bold those sites for which we are recommending a conversion and what the proposed use will be. So that's how it's reflected there. It's not in purple and yellow and orange, but eventually it will make its way into those land use maps if it's approved. Next slide, please. And finally, work that we are still undertaking, there's the site and area specific policies that I mentioned that we are proposing as part of the conversion requests. Work that we're doing right now, and that will come again to the public and to planning committee in the new year, is looking at all of those SASP, site and area specific policies that permit residential uses in employment areas today. And there are instances, as you can see on this map, there are over 12 site and area specific policies that allow residential uses to be on lands that are purple. And we are taking a close look at trying to reconcile these, recognizing that if a residential use is permitted, then it can no longer benefit from the policies, the employment area policies of the plan. And so we will be bringing to the public redesignation recommendations for these lands. And so that is work that is forthcoming.
So I'll hand it over to Jeff to talk about some of the city's next steps on some of what you're hearing, what you heard about this evening, and the official plan review in general.
Sure, thanks, Kristen. So as we've mentioned, on July 5th, a Planning and Housing Committee will be considering a number of reports, two of which members of my team have authored. So one of them is the major transit station areas, finalizing MTSAs, major transit station areas, and protected major transit station areas, about 150 of them. So there'll be a final report considered by committee on July 5th. And then there will also be a report on, as Christina mentioned, a number of employment area conversions and recommended employment area policies for citywide. And so those reports will be considered again on July 5th. I believe they're timed, so they'll be in the afternoon. The employment would, I think it's at 1 p.m. And then the major transit station area report will be considered afterwards. And then following that, it like I mentioned earlier, it will go to Big City Council. I think that's July 19th and the 20th, or that week, for adoption, after which what council adopts, we will send up to the minister for ministerial approval. And post the last city council meeting in July, members of my team with economic development and culture staff will be continuing, as Kyle mentioned, our due diligence and our review process of the remaining 100 or so conversion requests, and we'll bring forward a similar report just longer, because there'll be 100 or so conversion requests with staff recommendations. There's about 7 other major transit station areas that we'll be looking at. And so that, again, will also go to committee and council in early 2023. And finally, we are going to continue our engagement on changes to the official plan chapter 1 that will also include a new section on Indigenous planning perspectives, and we will be consulting on our draft official plan vision statement and directions that are also up for engagement and consultation, and we can put that in the chat as well. So still lots to do, and thank you for spending a couple hours with us tonight. And if you're interested in the other meetings, I think on the next slide we have the this is a series of 1 of 3, so we're meeting tonight, Wednesday and Thursday, with other policy themed meetings as well. And I think the next slide shows that. Back to you, Kristen. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so the next slide should show the next 2 meetings that are coming up, but we actually do have one final poll as well. So we will go back to that Mentimeter, and as Jeff mentioned, and I mentioned at the beginning as well, we are going to have engagement continuing this year on some of the remaining items for the official plan. So we just wanted to know how you want to continue to stay engaged. So you can pull out your Mentimeter and go to the poll, and we'll have one more question for you. So again, the question is, how would you like to continue to stay involved in Our Plan Toronto? And there's a couple options there. So virtual meetings, in-person pop-ups. So the more like informal style of engagement where we go to a community event or something. An e-bulletin, so something that would arrive in your email inbox, website, story map updates, or social media. Okay, so many people want to continue to see virtual meetings on this topic. Okay, thanks everyone. And then a couple for website and social media, so that continued online engagement piece as well. Okay, so we'll go to that next slide, and we'll talk about, we do have, again, 2 meetings coming up. Tomorrow evening, we have the neighborhoods and complete communities, and the following evening we have the policy focused meeting on housing and intensification, and they are both the same times, 5 till 7 p.m. And we'll go to the next slide. And I will just echo what Jeff said. A big thank you for all the comments and questions we had this evening. We heard a lot about protection for employment areas, including certain areas like the food terminal and Eastern Avenue, the flexibility of the OP to adapt to a changing economy, employment lands abutting with residential and kind of the conflicts and complaints that can come with that, and complete communities approach to employment areas and transit lands. So thank you everyone for your input tonight. Again, have a good evening, and thanks for being with us on this sunny day.
Good night, everyone.